I guess I'm going to start by talking about what I need to be doing. So I have my core, and if you saw part one of the video, there's my core, my shot-loaded core with a leather bolster on it. It is, if I remember correctly, 32 inches long. So now I have to calculate the length and the width that I'm going to make my strands. The length is super easy. All you have to do is figure out how long you want them to go, and then multiply by 1.5. You have to remember that the strands are going around, and they're going around at a 45-degree angle. Ideally, there's going to be some slight variations, but ideally you want them going down at a 45-degree angle. And so that calculation is they need to be cut 1.5 times. I'm probably going to cut them a little bit over length because I always like to err on the side of caution and have them longer. So now what we have to do is we have to figure out how wide to make each strand. So in order to figure out how wide to make our strands, we need calipers. Okay. Now these are these are digital calipers. I've got mechanical calipers as well. You can get them in any craft shop, little small ones as well for making jewelry, for measuring beads and stuff, which are plenty fine for this job because we're not doing anything big. Like this one will go all the way out to here. That's wider than any handle on a whip I'm going to make. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. I don't need to worry about the narrow end because I know how narrow those need to be because they are consistent. I need to know where my width is at the top, and then they're going to be narrowing to a point. So I really only need to measure my the top of my handle. And what's going to happen is you have to remember that what happens if you imagine these are the strands, okay, and they're going at a 45-degree angle. So if this is upright and these are going at a 45-degree angle, your strands need to cover, right? So I'm going to be doing an 8-strand braid. So here are my 8 strands. They overlap, right? They're going to be braided together. But I need each strand going each direction to make sure that they touch, and that when they wrap around, this strand, when it wraps around, comes in right behind this one and touches it, okay? So what I'm looking for is area coverage, not really width. So I need to make sure that each strand is wide enough to create the kind of coverage I need. So there is a calculation for that. What I need to do, let me zero out my calipers. And even though this is round, what I want is an average. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to roll it in my calipers. And so what I have is a diameter of 13 millimeters, okay? I use millimeters for small measurements because it's easier than using fractions and portions of an inch. So 13 millimeters. So the calculation for that is your diameter, D, times 4, okay? There's actually a mathematical calculation that this has been truncated to, and I can figure out the calculation, maybe post it later. But it really has to do with how you calculate radius and area and that kind of stuff. So it is 13 times 4, and then you divide it by the number of strands. So that 13 by 4 gives you the area coverage, and then what I need is to divide that by the number of strands, and that will give me the width of each strand that I need. So let me pull up my calculator here real quick. So I am looking at 13 times 4 divided by 8 because I'm doing an 8-strand belly. The inner parts of the braid are referred to as the belly, okay? So I'm doing an 8-strand belly. So my strand calculation turns out to be 6.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my strands to 10 millimeters, okay? Maybe 9. Now I'm going to do it to 10. I'm going to cut them to 10 millimeters, okay? I want a little bit of that extra space to give me more to work with when I'm doing my strand prep. So to cut my strands, I use what's called an Australian thumb strander, okay? I don't know why it's called that. I bought it in Kentucky and it sits on my index finger. So it's a Kentucky index cutter, I guess. I don't know. But what I'm going to do is using the other side, the back side of my calipers, get it zeroed out, and make sure that there's a guide here. There's a guide here and a blade that you can see right there sticking up. So I need to make sure that the distance between my guide and my blade is 10 millimeters. Yep, and it is actually 10.3. There we go. Hang on. There you go, 10. So I have my measurement at 10. Well, will I be able to see that? 9.98. Hey, Fairy. So I've got my thumb strander and I've got my hides. So if you've ever seen me cut strands before, I am going to essentially be working with something like this. This is a kangaroo hide. This is a veg tan kangaroo hide. This particular color is called natural. There are no dyes in it. I use these to do my custom dyes. So I have a natural and I have a black, okay? But what I'm going to be doing ultimately is I trim all of my strands going around the full size of the hide. So that's what a full kangaroo hide looks like, okay? It's kind of triangular. If you have any objection to leather and the processing of leather, I recommend you leave now because we're going to get a little detailed and specific, all right? I'll give you like 5 seconds to make up your mind. No? All right. So this is a hide. It comes off a kangaroo. Kangaroos in Australia, I'm not Australian, I'm just talking about the research I've done, are considered a nuisance animal because they breed at such prolific rates like deer here that they end up doing culls. And so the hides that you get from Australia are government approved. They're all tagged. It's all done sort of with government supervision. So these are the hides. These are the back legs over here. This would be the spine, the back, and this would be the neck. So it creates kind of a rough triangular shape, if you can see that, right? It's been rolled up, so, but you can see it creates kind of a rough triangular shape, all right? So what I'm going to do is, what I would do is I would trim all the edges off, these rough edges, to give me a straight all the way around edge. And then I would start trimming them, and as you go around, of course, the hide gets progressively smaller. But I wanted to give you an idea of how small these hides can get and still be usable, all right? So for example, here is a hide that I have cut strands out of. And you can see it's still roughly triangular, but it's significantly smaller, okay? I don't have another natural, so this is the one I'm going to use. But if you can see, here's a black one, and it is smaller still. And you can go around until this thing is about this big, okay? You can get a lot of use out of these. How I choose to use those strands varies depending on where they're coming from, because of the shape that they hold, because they get, you know, when you get into these tighter turns, it becomes more challenging. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my camera and I'm going to cut my strands. So I'm at 32 inches and I want to add 8 inches. So I want to get to 40 inches. So I need 60-inch strands, okay, roughly. And I'm going to cut them to 60 because I'm going to stretch them and their final length will be a little bit longer than 60, giving me that additional length that I want, all right? So I'm going to need my big ruler so I can measure these. Give me 1 second here. My big ruler so I can measure these strands. And then I'm going to show you how we cut them. So I'm going to move my camera over to here because it's actually a little bit easier for you to see. Get all up in my business here. Hey, Autumn. And this probably looks more suggestive than I intended, but hey, that's life in the real world. Put a helmet on, you know, life's dangerous. I'm going to back up here. Here's my hide, okay, and I lay them out on my lap. I take my thumb strander, or index finger strander as the case may be, and I fit it through my guide, because obviously I trimmed this off to where I needed it for the last batch that I did. And I'm going to just run this through to get it. Actually, you can't really see what I'm doing here. I'm going to run this through until I get to the end, okay? And then once I get to here, I'm ready to cut strands, okay? And this is how it happens. So I have roughly 18 inches of strand already kind of cut. I do, Steve, although it has been flickering. And so what you do is when you get around to the edge, I'm pulling outward and I'm just cutting. The guide is here and I'm just following the edge of the leather. You're welcome to come over if you want, Steve. Everyone's asleep but me, but if you don't have power, you're welcome to come hang out, charge your phone, do whatever. Okay, so what happens is you see how I'm getting to these corners. These are very specifically sharper angled kind of corners, what happens is these will get kind of narrower and narrower and sharper, and eventually I'll trim them so that they're a little bit more round. But this is fine for now. But I'll probably trim it before I go around the next time. Okay? I probably should have used more of the black, but oh well, no big. So there we go. There's 4 strands, 60 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 strands of neutral, 60 inches. I'm going to take my cutter off of there. Hey, Victoria. But you can just hear that, right? You can hear that texture. It doesn't really crumple. It's a very stiff texture. The thickness on this, let me zero out my calipers, is just over a millimeter, 1.08 millimeters. Hey, Kurt. All right, so let me put that aside because I'm trying to evenly distribute my usage here. I have another black hide. What's the measurement on this one? This is part of what makes this really fun. This is 1.37, so it's slightly thicker, I believe. No, it's about the same. I was at the wrong spot on the calipers. It's about the same thickness. But that's part of the point, is part of the prep that I do is leveling all of these strands to make sure that they are the same thickness between all of the strands. There's a substantial bit of prep that has to go on with these strands. So same thing. I just want to cut 4 strands of the black, cutting 10 millimeter wide strands. I'll just trim this real quick to get that on there. Dun, dun, dun. Trying to keep my delicate fingers away from that razor blade. And then same thing, just going to measure off and cut 4 of these strands. There's my 4 strands. All right. So let me set this aside, move my camera back. All righty. Well, hi, everybody. So I can set my hides aside now. And of course, I don't really have to do much math, even if I take my clip off, because I've got 4 even length strands, right? Take my clip off, find my ends here. Okay, so there's my ends, 2 ends. I'm just following them along to make sure they remain the same length, like you would do with, say, shoelaces. Put my ends together. Cut my loops so that I have 4 separate strands. Okay, so there's my other end, right? They came out even. Cut those and cut those. So there are my 4. Show them up against my beard so you can see them. 4 strands, all right? Now I've got to cut my natural strands here. Same thing, find my ends. Two ends. Hold them together, find my middle point. My, what's it called? My lark's head Is that what it is? Dun, dun, dun. Put my ends together, clip that middle loop, go to the end and separate these strands. Yeah, it's going to be a 4-foot signal whip, Kurt. I'm using a natural hide for half of them. When I do my outer braid, though, this is just for the inner braid. These are going to be dyed green. So I use natural hides so I can custom dye them. All right. It's not really much worth it to order black or dye them black because I can order them. But it's really difficult to order different colors of kangaroo, so I dye them by hand. So these are all going to be green. So this is the inner braid. Earlier, if you watched the video I did my shot-loaded core and then put a bolster on it. So the core, the shot bag, is duck cloth canvas wrapped in essentially duct tape. I use Gorilla Tape, but duct tape. And then it has a wrap piece of leather around it. You can see the seam here, and then it's all tied down, and that's going to make the foundation of my whip. So that's all of the weight in there. That's a number 12 lead shot. It runs half the length of my whip. My other video explains why I do that and why they're weighted and all that kind of stuff. So that's that, okay? So now what I need to do is, and you'd be familiar with this, Kurt, leather has some inherent stretch into it, and I want to take a fair amount of that out. You know, the people I think speak in hyperbole, like, oh, I want to take all the stretch out. If you take all the stretch out, it breaks, right? That's to failure. But what I want to do is I want to stretch these out because the stiffer they are, the more rigid they are, the easier they are to prep. And it also lets you know of any weak spots or whatever else. So despite the fact that these are 10 millimeters, of course, like if you take a thick rubber band and you stretch it, they'll get a bit thinner, right? So I'm not going to go from, you know, 10 to 4 millimeters, for example, and my strands at the fat end have to be 6.5 millimeters. So I expect them to shrink a little, and then I'm going to take some off the edges anyway. Because what you're going to see is, even though I cut them to 10 millimeters, because they were going around all those corners, you can see they've got these like weird bends in them, right? And so part of the prep is to take those bends out of them, okay? Because they've been cut in a circle, or really kind of in a rounded triangle. So what I have here is a bucket of water. It's filled up to about here, just enough to get this leather soaked. And I am literally going to dump the entirety. And sometimes if I'm sitting, these are sitting on my lap, I miss a strand. So I always count them at every step. So I have my 8 strands, and they are going right into a bucket of water. Okay? I'm going to let them sit there for a second. It's not like they have to soak for any length of time, but you do want them saturated all the way through, right? So there you can see the water dripping off of there. So you want to get them saturated, okay? You really want that water to penetrate into the cells to give you some elasticity to pull them. And then what happens, of course, is as that water evaporates, that leather becomes even drier and stiffer, and it maintains that longer, thinner shape, okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get my levels. And if you ever wondered why these are hanging up here, this is why. Okay, because you can, in order for these to dry and stretch, you have to have them under tension, right? So some people do what I refer to, I don't know if they call it this, but they do what's referred to as a dynamic stretch, meaning they take their wet strands and they double loop them around a hook and then pull them super high tension. The reason I don't do that is because when I started doing whips, I didn't have a strong enough fixed point to do that, so I had to come up with another solution. The other thing I don't like is that it puts so much tensions on the strands, it is more inclined to break strands that aren't inherently weak or problematic. It puts them under a lot of tension. So I find this way puts them under enough tension that I get the results that I want without doing as much risk to failure with the strands, okay? So my strands are hanging out in the water. I have my clips, right? You've seen those. These are available all kinds of places now. I used to only be able to get them in one store, but I found them in others, the same things. The rubber covers are different colors, but they're the same springs and the same tension, so I really like them. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put my bucket on the floor real quick. and then reach down and get my strands. And then I'll show you what I'm doing with these. All right. So I have my levels. If I'm just drawing the natural strands, I can get 4 strands on these. Okay, it doesn't matter how long they are, I can generally get 4 strands on these. And then what I'm going to do is when I dye, and you can see I've stretched all kinds of things and dyed all sorts of things on here. You do not want your strands to overlap when they're dyeing because they'll leach dye out of each other and they'll discolor. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do them by color because I'm a little obnoxious that way. So I'm going to take 2 of my strands so you can see the water dripping off of them. I haven't dried them. I haven't, squeezed them out. They're fine as is with just all that water. Okay. Because again, I'm going to be stretching them. So what I want to do is I'm going to put 3 clips across the top. What I've done is I've overlapped them at the top. Okay, so I can get them in the same space. And then I'm going to put 2 more on the top on the other side. All right. I do them flesh side up, or sorry, flesh side down, skin side up. And the reason I put 3 clips on here as opposed to something else is because I can fit 3. If I could fit 4, I'd probably do 4 because I want as much tension on those as I can. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to follow my hands down here and just kind of loosely pull them down to the end. Okay. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to move my camera down so you can see this. I'm just going to clip up one real quick. There's no tension on that strand I've just clipped. But what I'm doing is I'm putting the end down and bracing it and then pulling. So you see where this strand ends now, right? It would end about where the level gauge on the level is, all right? But if I put this under enough tension, you can see it comes down, in this particular case, probably 4 inches past that now. And then I want to take 2 clips because it is under a fair bit of tension. I don't want it to slip, and clip it right there. So then I'm going to take these strands. That black felt a little looser, and so you're going to find that when I stretch the black strands out, they're actually going to stretch even further. All right. So I'm going to set these strands here. Do the other side now. Same thing, just pull them down equally. This just saves me from having to chase the strands around. And again, you can see they're going to overlap on this end. That's fine. If these were strands that I had dyed, again, I wouldn't do that because they are going to, hey, Michelle and Michael, Raven, how are you? So, because I don't want I wouldn't want the color to leach out of dyed strands. So I would only put them on one side and not let them come into contact with each other. That was a trial and error, I can tell you that. So there we go. That is one side. That's the other. I want to make sure it's not flipped. There we go. Because I want these to sit flat, okay? And again, I'm getting probably about 4 inches or so past where they had originally sat when I kind of laid them out there, all right? So again, these are wet. So when you hear me say I have to wet and dry my strands, this is what I'm doing. So I'm going to just set this up to dry. That's why I have this rack up here. Now I can just put the rack up. Boom. And that way I can get upwards of, so again, I have six levels there that are hanging from a rack in the ceiling. If I'm doing dyed strands, 16 strands, I would need half of those to be dyed if I'm doing a contrasting color, black and red, black and green, etc. And I'm only putting 2 strands per level, I would need at least 4 levels to do that. But that doesn't account things like the Turk head knots or the wrist strap. So to do a whip with custom dyes, I need that many levels to get that many strands up and drying at once. Otherwise, I have to do them in batches. And I don't like doing that because then I can't guarantee the consistency of the color. When I dye everything at once, it's like doing the same dye lot. And I know all the colors for that whip, for the wristband, for the outer braid, and for the knots, they're all going to be the same dye color, all right? So I need to have enough space to dry all of these strands out in order to get the colors consistent. Now this leather felt a little looser. I'm not really sure how to explain that. As you saw, I put my calipers on it. It's the same thickness, but it's got a bit of a texture to it that it feels like it's going to stretch a lot longer, okay? Again, if you watched the video, you saw me measure these. These are the same length as the natural strands I just dried. I'm using the same level setup. I've got a couple of different brands. These two are the same, so I can show you. So I'm going to get all 4 strands set up here first. No, I dropped a clip. So again, these are coming right out of the water. I don't know if you can see, but you can see that sheen on them. You can see the water dripping off of them. Like I said, these were soaked and saturated, not for any length of time, just to make sure that you actually got the penetration from the water. Get it all the way through the strand. And then I won't be able to do anything with these probably until at least tomorrow night. Obviously, the areas that are overlapped don't get as much exposure to the air. They're going to take longer to dry. That's okay. I've got 183,000 other projects to work on, so I get these done and let them dry, so they're ready when I want to, have time to work on them, not the other way around. I don't want to be waiting for them. So take both strands. There we go. There are my 8 strands for my belly, cut, wet, and stretching. So they will stretch or dry into that permanent position, which is either 4 to 8 inches, depending on the color, longer than they were cut to. All right, so that's going to give me my extra length. Even though they were cut to the length I need, in case there's any kind of weirdness, having them longer is better than having them too short. So when we started earlier today, we had nothing. We used a piece of duck cloth canvas. We cut our shot bag. We built our shot bag with duct tape. We filled it with number 12 lead shot. It's a 24-inch shot bag for a 48-inch whip, so it will take up half of it. I used an 1.25 inch diameter at the fat side of the whip. It's going to give you a good grip, but again, I can thin that leather out to accommodate some of that space. My bolster is a thinner, probably 1.75 inches, ounce and 3/4 to 2 ounce, very, very pliable, soft cowhide, cut to a taper, 8 inches longer than my core. So my core goes to here. My bolster is 8 inches longer. My first braid will extend it 8 inches further. So I went from 24 to 32 to 40 is what the braid will do. Then the last braid will add another 8 inches. Okay, so there you go. So my I showed you how to do the calculation for the strand measurements. You cut them oversized. I need them 6.5 millimeters. I cut them to 10. I'm going to be trimming them down to 6.5. And as you saw, obviously they are cut 10 millimeters all the way down. But I'm going to be tapering those from 6.5 down to a point. Okay, so I'm going to actually show you how to taper those strands all the way down to a point. So they're not going to be straight strands, they're going to be angled. All right, but all that after they dry. So cut, soak, stretch, dry. All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. More when those strands are dry, and we'll get into some more strand prep. All right, bye for now.